Good evening, and welcome back to the Poe Museum. If you think you know Edgar Allan Poe, think again. We're about to show you some Poe portraits like you've never seen them before. And that will be the subject of tonight's installment of the Curator's Crypt. If you've been watching every single episode of the Curator's Crypt until now, and why wouldn't you, of course you would have remembered a few years ago we acquired a tiny photograph of Poe that actually shows him happy. I mean, he's not smiling, but it's a good point in his life. It's a counterbalance to the portrait of Poe we all know, the one where he's miserable, depressed, sullen, sulky. It's not that one. In fact, this one was taken 4 days after that one. So the sad, miserable, depressed Poe, that is him 4 days after a suicide attempt. He's fallen in love with a New England poetess named Sarah Helen Whitman. He's proposed to her. She turned him down. So he tried to overdose on laudanum, and he threw it up. And the night before the daguerreotype was taken, a friend took him out drinking, hoping maybe that would cheer him up, not knowing that it took about a glass of wine to make Poe staggering drunk. He'd be sick for days afterwards. So this is Poe on a bad day. 4 days later, that poetess, Sarah Helen Whitman, agreed to marry him. And things are looking up. About that time, he wrote a letter that said, after a long and bitter struggle with illness, poverty, and 1,000 evils which attend them, I find myself linked in a position to establish myself permanently and to triumph over all difficulties. This is an optimistic Poe. This is Poe on the day of his engagement. And that's probably why people don't like it. Even the owner of the original plate, Sarah Helen Whitman, preferred the miserable one. She called it the Ultima Thule, which means the furthest point north, or the ends of the world, and is taken from a line from his poem Dreamland. I've returned but newly from a distant dim Thule. So this is what she liked. She said it looked like he'd been to the ends of the world and back. And she said, oh, other people like the happy Poe picture, but she preferred the sad Poe. Probably a good thing he did not end up marrying her. Anyway, the original daguerreotype is in the Brown University Library, and some copies were made of it, and we were able to get a little copy photograph on glass. And we were really excited about it, but it was in pretty rough shape. I mean, you could barely see it. You could see it from just right at the right angle, but in some places you could see through it. So we knew we had to get it conserved. And last year we sent it to the conservator. There was also another picture. This one was a painting of Poe done by one of his friends, Gabriel Harrison. And if you remember, during Poe's lifetime, there was only one oil portrait made of him. And it's pretty bad. It doesn't look a lot like it. We mainly know him through black and white photographs. So almost 20 years after Poe's death, Gabriel Harrison decided he wanted to do something about it. He wanted to make the most lifelike, most accurate painting of Poe ever. So he took a photograph of Poe that he had, enlarged it, and then he consulted Poe's mother-in-law, who was still living at the time. And she probably knew Poe better than anybody in the world. She was the last person alive who'd actually lived under the same roof with him. So Harrison had her advise him on the right hair color. It always looks black in the photos because they're black and white photos. It was actually brown. And she got the skin tones, the eye color, the color of the clothing. And his completed work he placed at the Long Island Historical Society, now the Brooklyn Historical Society. And somehow it disappeared. By the 1960s, it was gone. We don't know where it went. And then just a couple of years ago, a copy of it by Harrison was donated to the Poe Museum. But again, it was in kind of rough shape. It was dark. It had scratches, a lot of missing, flaked off paint. So the photograph and the painting needed some work. So he sent them both to the conservator, and now they're back. And this is our little photograph on glass. And now you can see it a whole lot better than you could see it before. Before, his whole forehead was missing, and there's kind of a pattern of blooming on there, almost look like fungus or something on there. And it looks like there had been some water that had gotten back behind the glass. And maybe that blooming was a residue of whatever kind of liquid was back there. So as far as what we did find about the photograph, it's a hyalotype. It is a photograph on glass. The dark stuff is on the glass, and the light stuff, you're actually looking through the glass at a light backing. Somebody at some point, probably in the 1950s, had put a glass mirror behind the image, which was supposed to reflect some of the light. Remember, the photographer Curtis used to take hyalotypes and put gold behind them, and he thought it gave the image some kind of depth. And that's maybe what they were thinking of doing here, but instead you just saw your reflection in the mirror because there was so much of the original image just missing. So what the conservator did was very carefully, because you can't just take a scrub brush and wipe this off, was blow off and gradually, over the course of several months, get all the bloom pattern off of there and put a new backing behind it. She repaired and cleaned up this little mat around. This is a mat, this is a preserver here, and even the little case that held it. Now this is half a case. We can see the little latch is still there, but it would have hinged and closed, so there would be another half of the case there. And we don't know a whole lot about the provenance of this. The person who sold this to us said that it came from the Poe family, or at least he heard that it came from the Poe family, but there's lots of Poes out there, so it could have been Joe Poe, any old Poe. But it is, now that it's been conserved, it's a lot more readable, and you can get a better view of a somewhat happy Edgar Allan Poe. Somewhat happy because at the time he was engaged to Sarah Helen Whitman, he still had feelings for another woman, Annie Richmond. But she wouldn't leave her husband for him, so that wasn't going to work out. And after about a month of his engagement to Sarah Helen Whitman, they broke it off. And he wrote to Annie that I was really just engaged to her for your sake. And then, not quite a year later, he was engaged to another woman. And that was Elmira Royster Shelton back here in Richmond. And that didn't work out either because Poe died about 10 days before they would have married. So there's no happy stories here at the Poe Museum. But what about the painting? It's right here. So first thing you'll notice right off the bat is that the conservator did in-paint all the areas of missing paint, even the scratch on his forehead, and she very carefully cleaned off the surface of whatever dust that was embedded in the paint surface. And there is some kind of blooming here, and she was very careful about what kind of solvent she used because she didn't want to hurt the underlying cardboard that it's painted on. And another thing that she did was she removed a document from the back of it. Yes, there was a document detailing the provenance, the creation of the piece, written by Harrison himself. And it was taped to the back of the picture. And that was not safe for the document. It was gradually going to deteriorate. The back of the painting was sort of very acidic cardboard, so that was eventually going to wear away the paper. The tape, we don't know what kind of adhesive was used, so that could have worn away at the paper. So she very gradually, very carefully removed the tape and the document. And when she just started to get the edge of the document up, she thought, well, there might be a photo back here. There might be another image on the back of it. We don't know what this was taped to. And she was very excited. She says, once we get that paper off, we're going to find out what's on the back. And what do you think was on the back? Nothing. There wasn't anything back there. Well, that's still, the front's still nice. That's what we like. And the document was successfully removed. So we do have this detail in the whole provenance of the piece. And I read this to you on an earlier video, but it basically details how it was created. And it says that this likeness of Edgar A. Poe is from a daguerreotype taken by his personal friend, the subscriber, in 1847. That's a lie. Gabriel Harrison didn't take the original picture. He just pretended he'd taken the original photograph. But anyway, in 1865, the undersigned made an enlarged photograph of said picture and finished it in oil colors under the eyes of Mrs. Clem, Poe's mother-in-law, for the purpose of getting the true colors of complexion, eyes, hair, and dress. This picture, when finished, gave perfect satisfaction to Mrs. Clem and many of his friends. Poe's face was not symmetrical and always expressed a sad and disappointed look. The undersigned presented the original to the Long Island Historical Society together with Poe's and Mrs. Clem's wedding rings melted into one for safekeeping. This picture is a copy from the original by the subscriber, Gabriel Harrison. So that is going to be safely kept in archival folders and preserved. And this painting is going to go back on display. We're going to make sure that it's properly framed and displayed. And it's going to give people a better look at the true colors of Edgar Allan Poe. So what do you think? Is this the most accurate likeness of Poe ever made? And how do you think the conservator did with this? Do you agree with the decision she made? Let us know down in the comments what you think. And until next time, thanks for joining us, and say happy birthday to Edgar the Poe Museum cat.